Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Rambi. I am privileged to have as my guest this evening Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, former Member of Parliament, who we have not had on our show for a few months, from the time of the last election, I believe. Welcome and good evening, Eran.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Right. So, Eran, lot has happened in the country and in the SJB since we last had you on the show. But of course, the SJB has not performed very well. But that's all water under the bridge, hopefully, and we must look to the future. And you have set the trend now by submitting your resignation from the post of party organizer for Moratua. Would you care to elaborate on why you did that and is it something that you felt you needed to do?
Right. Yes, and the reason for that is that doesn't mean that I have left the party. I certainly had the responsibility for being the local organizer there, and the election result, Nilesh, as you said, was very adverse for the opposition and for the SJB. People decided that I would like to think that it was largely a protest vote. Right, that went in favor of the NPP. Anyway, this is a democracy. And when results come out, I think that we need to have some internal reflection, whatever the result is. And we need to build that culture. In many countries of the world, you will find that, if there is an election, it can be in Canada or Australia, or Europe, or the UK, or wherever, when the election results are coming in, the trend is clear, and a political party knows that it's losing, for example, normally there will be immediately a statement made by the leader of that political party, and it would have a few components. One component in that would be, is the leader will be saying something like, I want to thank everyone who has voted for us, naturally. And also that we want to congratulate, those who are being elected, right, as they form a government. And then I would be resigning as leader, right, and that will follow as well. It'll be a short statement. I mean, all the countries I mentioned, generally that's the culture.
Absolutely. Right. That's a spirit of democracy.
Spirit of democracy. You take the Sri Lankan situation. Sri Lankan situation is very different. Sri Lankan situation is these leaders come and occupy leadership positions in political parties, and they basically manipulate the system to stay on for life. And this was the reason that 90% of the members of parliament in the UNP actually decided to move out and form the SJB. It's not because they had a huge philosophical difference with the UNP. It's a similar, quite similar in many ways, not completely, but in many ways. But it was mainly because Eran Wickramaratne had become leader in 1994, and 30 years later, now 31 years this year, is still the leader. So it's a culture thing. It's true about the SLFP. You name a political party, generally it's true. This phenomena is there, and this phenomena is there in South Asia, lack of internal democracy in political parties.
Which is something we have addressed on this program itself many times.
Yes, so that's there. And then Sri Lanka goes even one step further, Nilesh, right? We have an executive presidential system. And the executive presidential system, right, you get elected as president and sometimes you serve 2 terms, right? And then you have the situation after you have been gone to the presidency, you want to come back and stick in politics and come into parliament. I mean, Mahinda Rajapaksa, I can't believe, coming back into parliament, right?
After
and sitting
being
there.
president.
After being president. Maithripala Sirisena, right? I hope Eran Wickramaratne doesn't even dream about that. I would say this to Chandrika Kumaratunga's credit. I would say that she did do that, but generally that is there. It's a little bit like I was CEO of the bank years ago, right? And it's like, now me returning to the bank to do a management job.
As a branch manager.
Yeah, I mean, that's just not on, right? That's not on. So once you have reached the highest position, the CEO's position, right, you need to change it. So this culture, the Sri Lankan culture, that recognizing, I never really say that people should retire at a particular age or not. My personal philosophy is there's no need for retirement age. If somebody is fit and proper, it's better to have a 60-year-old fit and proper person rather than a 40-year-old person who is not fit and proper. So I go strictly being fit and proper. But here is not that. Here is a situation where you have occupied the positions and the highest officers and you're not going. And when there's defeat, you're not recognizing it. So on that principle, Nilesh, I thought it's fair by the people. There are lots of people working with us. Lots of people aspiring to do what I did, right? Think that at least they have a chance, you see. And that is why I had a discussion with the leader of the party, and I said that this particular one, I think I should resign, and maybe the party should appoint somebody suitable for it. Obviously, we have different strengths, and each of us needs to play to our strengths, but also recognize that when you have adverse outcome, that people need to take responsibility. So that was my thinking.
And this is quite admirable, which is my opinion, of course, and it's in the spirit of democracy. And hopefully your example will be taken by others at all levels, which is something that democracy needs in order to refresh democracy itself as well as the party. And this applies to, I think, all parties rather than just one. So hopefully we will see more people taking your example at all levels.
If you would permit me, Nilesh, I would like to make another point about leadership. You see, Sri Lankan leaders have generally, I would say, failed. I'm not talking of any particular leader. I'm making a general statement after being, my first degree is in political science, apart from economics and going into finance and banking and all. The Sri Lankan leaders have failed whenever they have had a level of discretion. You see, it goes back in history, sometimes they have toyed with this idea, right? They started with, election dates are not fixed. And this in the Westminster system, it's not fixed.
Yes.
You see, so.
Whereas in the US system, it is fixed.
Yeah. So we are more in the Westminster cultural system. And so they have the discretion. And then they've extended that. And sometimes they have toyed with the idea and actually extended the period of parliament. They have used methods. You see, they have used methods. Now, I think it was Mrs. Bandaranaike, I think in 1970, she got elected. I was a kid then. And then it was 1975, the term should have ended, extended it to 77. Right? And then subsequently, J.R. Jayawardene came up with a similar idea. By then, of course, I was in university. And I was at the University of London, and I still remember Chanaka Amaratunga, who is no more, he was in the Liberal Party.
The leader of the Liberal
Party. And maybe Professor Vijay, who wrote the book.
Rajiva.
Professor Rajiva. I think Rajiva was also there at that time. And then they invited me also, and we had a meeting. And we had the meeting at the London School of Economics, and the meeting was opposing what J.R. Jayawardene was actually doing there, right?
Which was the referendum.
Which was the referendum, and using the referendum to extend parliament. And for me, it was almost a little funny, because a few years earlier, I was in school, and it was a 1977 election, and the UNP had swept to office, and J.R. Jayawardena was Prime Minister, and all the MPs who went to my school, school I will not mention, but went to my school, right? All of them came to.
I think you and I went to the same school.
Okay. So let's not mention the name, right? They were all invited to school, and there was only one member of the SLFP, because they had, I think, only 8 seats in that election.
Yes, indeed.
and
8 out of 168.
Yeah, so I think that was just Anura Bandaranayaka. So they all came, and they gave, the education minister Nisanka Wijeratne gave his speech, the principal, the Prime Minister J.R. Jayawardena gave his speech, and then I had the opportunity also of proposing the vote of thanks, you see, as a head prefect of the school. And so I, as a schoolboy, kind of sang their praises a few years earlier. It was later in university, when I was a bit more enlightened, right? I was wondering, what on earth are these people doing, right? And basically, so discretion is not often properly used by leaders. And the point I'm trying to make here is something that I just need to highlight, because I am driven in terms of it's about systems. We need to have laws, and we need to have processes, we need to have systems, and they must be upheld. I'm not a person who says, individuals can come and change everything. I don't look at people only. People are important, but systems. So now we have a situation in the present system, the last 30-40 years, where we elect a parliament of 160 whatever number, and 29 come on the national list.
Right. So it's 196 and 29.
196 and the 29, so 225. And then when the election is held, right, all 225 are elected. Some people have the impression that only the 196 are elected. All 225 are elected, right? Because before the election, even the people on the national list are also named. The others contesting are also named. So before people go to vote, they know exactly who is where, and they vote. And then after that, the leaders of the party, from either those who contested or those who are on the separate list, can appoint a member as a national list MP, right? Right. Now, that authority that the party has is not an unlimited authority. That authority again is limited. They have to make that appointment within the framework of who contested, or on the people on the list, or any of them. They have to appoint the number of seats they have got. But the limitation is, a further limitation is, they have to do that before Parliament commences. Now, now see the abuse of it, right? We had Ranil Wickramasinghe's UNP some time ago in the last Parliament. They secured one nationalist seat. For 9 months or something like that, they didn't fill that seat. And 9 months later, they named Ranil Wickramasinghe. And I'm not concerned about the individual here. I'm concerned about the system. It's a violation of the sovereignty of the voter. It's a violation of the sovereignty of the voter. Right? Now somebody said, but there was no preference vote for the person. Preference vote is not relevant, because in the Westminster system, right, if I was contesting, let's say, a seat somewhere in Gaul or Kandy or Colombo Central or whatever I'm contesting, right, then people come in the Westminster system and vote for the party. They're not voting for me individually, but the party tells them ahead that Eran Wickramaratne is our candidate for that. So when they vote for the party, I get elected. It's the same with the national list. People have voted, and when they have voted, those people must be appointed before Parliament commences, not 9 months later. There can't be any delays. Now, Nilesh, to illustrate my point, take the extreme position. There are, you said, 196 and 29. Okay, take the extreme position. All the party political leaders decide, we are not going to appoint any of the 29.
So then you have a parliament of 196.
Then you have parliament of 196.
Which is not what the people
No, it's not the constitution, right? It's not the upholding the sovereignty of the constituency and the voter. It's not, right? So that is why I said that, right? When we leave discretion to leaders, sometimes the discretion is not properly utilized. Even in this parliament, every nationalist seat should have been filled before parliament commenced. It's a systemic issue.
But
I'm not talking about several parties. Wrong is wrong. Party doesn't really matter. Leaders don't matter, right? And we need to correct it. Now the problem is in Sri Lanka, if you keep the discretion for leaders, abuse happens. That is why we have to often, put more and more laws. You see, often. That is why I'm also thinking, now if you look at provincial council elections, we just did away with it. And we took the rights of people, right? We took the rights of people. We didn't ask them whether we have to take their rights away. If people don't want provincial councils, I'm all for it. Let every province have a referendum and decide whether they need it or not. The people decide. We in parliament can't sit and decide put provincial councils or we die for 5 years. So see what leaders have actually done. Take the local councils. Right?
Which there was a Supreme Court judgment a few months ago.
Exactly, right. We have violated it. That is why I say, if you look at the leaders who have been in this country, they have not used their discretion properly. They have not been able to clearly think, or if they clearly thought, then they have actually done something that is wrong. That's what they have done. If we are to take this country forward, we need leaders who can think clearly. We need leaders who will have the spine to do what is right? Otherwise, this country can't be taken forward. That is why I would say, I pointed that out on the national list. I'm pointing out that on elections as well. This is why, when discussion is not properly used, we may have to legislate to actually put the dates of elections down so that party leaders can't just decide when to cancel it, when to postpone it, when to do away with it. They can't decide. It's like this, Nilesh, right? I used to play some sports, hockey, cricket, and so forth. Before the cricket,
you're making an understatement there, because your sporting career is also well known.
Yeah. So before I go, I used to open the batting. When I get into the middle, Nilesh, before the match commences, I know what the rules of the game of cricket are. I know the rules, right? Exactly, before I start the game. Now, in the middle of the game, right, I put my leg forward under the old rule. I'm clearly leg before wicket. The ball is going to hit the wicket. I've covered it. It hit my leg. The umpire goes like this. Right? Suddenly, in the middle, everybody appeals, and the umpire says, "No. This 2 hours ago, we just changed the rule. There's nothing called leg before wicket." When you are elected, people like ourselves, we are elected under a certain set of rules. That's what we are elected under, right? Those rules under which we are elected, we can't have the discretion to change it. That the people are suffering, the people must decide to change it. How can we come and say, we elected for 5 years, we are going to extend this parliament for 10 years? If that logic goes, Eran might get ideas, right? If that logic goes, right? There's no such thing. If you are elected for 5 years, in 5 years an election has to be held. People have to decide in a democracy whether the incumbent party stays on or new parties come in. So this is why I keep stressing this point, right? That unfortunately, because our leaders have failed, some things I think we have to legislate.
But Eran, what is it about our leaders in Sri Lanka, and there have been so many who have violated these democratic principles, and it's not as if they are new to politics. They knew what they were doing, they know what they're doing, but yet and they have certainly read the constitution as party leaders, and perhaps not all MPs have read the constitution, but party leaders certainly have, and they know that the constitution says that people are sovereign. The sovereignty lies with the people. So is this something insidious which happens when you become president or party leader, Or is it simply that common sense goes out of the window? Or a combination of both?
Yeah, I think it will be a combination of many factors, right? And it's a culture that has evolved, and we need to change it. Now, we were talking about basically elections and rules and conventions and international practices and how those need to be adhered to and honored to preserve a democratic system. And then we were talking about the responsibility of leaders in doing that and how they haven't done it. But let's look at another angle to that. You take the whole issue, if you want, of corruption, right? And leaders in this country have been accused of corruption, right? But none of them have been convicted. But if you take the case studies in Asia, whether you take Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, whatever countries you take, presidents and prime ministers have been convicted and held responsible, and some are serving jail sentences. In Sri Lanka, you see, somehow or the other, we have wangled it in a way that the law applies only to the common man, not to those in authority and in power. This must change. I'm calling on the new president, unprecedented mandate, apply the rule of law. I'm calling on the president, don't interfere politically with investigations. Don't intimidate the judiciary in any way. If he gets it right, this country will change.
Now, to add to what you just said, even now in South Korea, we have the drama where the president who was accused of corruption, and even the first lady was accused of corruption, then declared martial law and tried to basically take the sovereignty away from the people and the legislative power from parliament. But fortunately, he was, well, it didn't work basically because parliament voted him down. And then, of course, he was impeached. And there is now a warrant for his arrest. And that saga is going on. But the investigations into the whole issue and also the corruption inquiries are all going on. But as you said, in Sri Lanka, these things somehow get swept under the carpet. And it's something that, I mean, in Sri Lanka, we know through media, social media, and just word of mouth, we know who did what. We know the motives. Very often we know how something happened. And yet the wheels of justice just seem to get stuck in the mud. And that has to do with politics, not with anything else. Because if you look at, say, the CID investigations, most of the CID investigations are very thorough, quite complete. The CID has, they do their job. The files are there. And they present those files, and then nothing happens. The same goes for presidential commissions. Some very fine commissioners have been appointed to investigate various scandals, and most often they are Supreme Court judges or retired Supreme Court judges who do a very fine job. I mean, I've read many of those commission reports, presidential commission reports, and the amount of detail is amazing. So what stops us? What is it that happens with our leaders? Is it just absolute power?
Yes, so you raised a very important thing on corruption and on investigations, on how officials have done this. And it's interesting that you raised it, because Nilesh, just last week on the 8th of January, right, it's a day I will always remember, because Lasantha Wickramatunge, the Sunday leader, the editor, he was killed.
Murdered in broad daylight in Hattidia.
Murdered in broad daylight.
On the road.
And I remember that day, quite distinctly, because I got a phone call from a family member immediately saying he had been attacked He had been rushed to the Kalubowil hospital. And I immediately went to see the family members when that happened. So it's like fresh in my mind. I was not a politician. I was just a banker then. I was just a friend, you see. And if you recollect that incident, Lasantha had gone on some exposure on a purchase of MiG aircrafts by Sri Lanka, and exposed it and saying that there was some corruption in it. And then later some fundamental rights cases were put saying that Lasantha had defamed the defense secretary and so forth. Anyway, Lasantha was summoned to give evidence, and he was summoned to give evidence on the 12th of January 2009, in my recollection. But on the 8th, few days before, the attack happened on him. And as you said, it's widely known that there have been severe investigations and reports have been there, and lots of people have spoken about it for years and years. And now it is 16 years since then. But still there is no closure for the family on that. So interestingly, we have a new government. Largely the members of this government were people who basically wanted to defend the media and the safety of media personnel. Now they are in authority. They have been elected. People are given them a mandate, right? And these cases must be brought basically to justice. You have and the other ones, immediate things I remember are like Sandhya Eknaligoda is still going around, right, pursuing justice for her husband, 50-year-old cartoonist, suddenly goes missing 2 days before the election in 2010, on the 24th of January of the presidential election, Mahinda Rajapaksa's election. And till today, right, she's saying, where's my husband, where's my husband? I need closure. Investigations have been held on that as well. And there's a lot of things, right? The other one was, I remember, is the Nations Associated Editor Keith Noah, right? He was stopped and beaten. And I remember, people were just looking for him, and Krishanta Kure was his boss. And Krishanta was vociferous about it. And Keith Noah was found, and what happened? They tried to frame Krishanta Kure subsequently on some other case because he was speaking out on it. You see, so this culture of impunity, one is sometimes it's like murder, sometimes it's been assault, right? It's been threatening, right? A culture of impunity, and then those who come to the defense of those people, like Krishanta Kure, and those who come to the defense of those people have had to flee the country. Then I remember, Sonali had left the country, Samara Singha, she left the country. Then there are lots of journalists who have just had to leave the country because they haven't felt very safe because of this culture of impunity. So I think we have a wonderful opportunity. People have given a mandate to a new government, right? And they need to change the culture. So in changing the culture, the first principle I would say is justice, right? Those who have been wronged through the judicial process, not any other process, right, must be able to go and give the evidence. The investigation evidence is there, and then the judges need to give their verdict. If somebody is innocent, that's good for that person as well, because after that, even if it's a story that has been concocted on them, they can walk out free because they've been cleared by the courts. But if they are guilty, found to be guilty, they must be punished. So then that becomes a lesson in changing the culture in the country, that people know that you can't do these things and actually get away. So media particularly, right, and media freedom must be protected. Now I know I have also sometimes been a victim of, some media person writing something which is not accurate or wrong or insulting or whatever. But on that basis, the regulation of the media can never be done by a government. Never be done. If they need to tighten laws, the legislature has a role in it, but the executive has no role in it. Media regulation, media ethics is needed. There's no question about it. And we see with social media a lot of unethical things happening, unethical practices. Ethics are needed, but self-regulatory mechanisms. And when I mean self-regulatory, I'm not talking about, you say, let's say your channel does something wrong, you regulating it. I'm talking about the industry getting together, self-regulatory mechanisms, independent bodies, and regulating it, but not hiding behind this thing that the government will do it. We had an online safety bill that was brought, right? It was improperly pushed through Parliament, improperly, because while we were contesting some of the clauses in the online safety bill, the government pushed it through. You see, the government pushed it through, and even a vote was not called on some of the amendments. They were just pushing it through. That's why I call it improperly pushed through, right? And in that online safety bill, it's being used even now, right? When there's a social media activist who is saying something, to arrest them. You see, I'm saying no. Go for judicial processes, even if it's the media. Go for judicial processes. Don't go for these, high-handed tactics of, frightening journalists and media personnel and all. I think we have to get out of that culture. Go for judicial processes. I'm all for judicial processes, because in a democracy, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary must be independent of each other. Then people have confidence. That is why I would advocate that. So because you raised that only, I elaborated on it, particularly because I remember last week was the 8th of January, and it was the day we remember most of these things with Lasanta's murder.
Absolutely. But I'd like to discuss this matter a little further, but right now let's take a short commercial break and we'll be right back.
නව යෞවනියන් නව ජවයකින් ක්‍රිකට් පිටියේ නව යුගයක් සටහන් කිරීමට සූදානම්. ICC වයස අවුරුදු 19න් පහළ කාන්තා T20 ලෝක කුසලාන ක්‍රිකට් තරඟාවලිය 2025 රටවල් 16ක් සාඩම්බර කුසලානයක් අලංකාර තරඟාවලියක් ජනවාරි 18 වෙනිදා සිට TV1 සමග රැඳෙන්න.
Welcome back to Face to Face. We are in conversation with Eran Wickramaratne, former Member of Parliament, who was actually the Member of Parliament in the last Parliament who was most active in the committees of Parliament. That means he was present and was most active in those committees. And of course, much of the work of Parliament is in those key committees. So it's unfortunate that we have lost his voice in Parliament, but hopefully next time, Eran. But that's some ways off. But of course, we will continue to have you on our programs so you can impart your wisdom to the public and certainly to those in office right now and to the opposition. Now, Eran, we were talking about the high-profile cases in Sri Lanka, which just get swept under the carpet and languish for years, sometimes for decades. But one thing about justice is that justice must be done and must be seen to be done as well. So if you allow a case to go for 16 years, like Lasantha Wickramatunga's murder, then even if you get justice in the end, it's just not seen to be done. But of course, better late than never. And as you said, those in office now have this golden opportunity to set things straight and to bring closure. But there are a lot of other cases, Eran, where once again the public believe they know what happened because the stories go around and around, and then the theory is formed, and there is usually a dominant theory which is formed, It may not be absolutely correct. It may be wildly wrong. But in the end, if the matter doesn't go through the judicial processes that you were speaking about, we'll never know, will we? And there are many high-profile cases. You mentioned the Eknadigoda case as well. But what about the MTV attack case, which was a brazen attack on the MTV station in the Panama Panipitiya? What's come of that? The Wasim Tajuddin murder case, what's become of that? The Navy personnel abducting young men in the heart of Colombo and taking them to Trincomalee, and then they simply disappeared. What's become of that one? And of course, the Easter Sunday attack, which, yes, there were certain cases which were brought, but the public does not believe that justice was done. And especially all Sri Lankans, but especially the Catholic, the Christian community wants to see justice done, and the Cardinal keeps repeatedly referring to it. So much needs to be done, and this government has the opportunity and has the duty, the responsibility, wouldn't you say?
Yes, certainly, because the slogan or the unique selling proposition of the NPP and the Eran Wickramaratne as president was that he will bring an end to corruption. And I'm using the word corruption in the broader context, not just financial corruption, but including, the rule of law. You see, that he will bring it to an end. So that's what people voted for. So clearly, that's correct that people have a very high expectation that will be done, right? We're not going to pass any judgment on the government because it's still too early.
Early days.
Early days. And they need to be given the space to actually let these processes happen within a reasonable framework and reasonable time. And then to see the courts basically coming up with either clearing people or convicting people, one of the two. So if you take it, if I just put it in broad categories, one is sometimes there has been murder, and sometimes the reasons are not clear. So if you refer to an individual like Tajuddin, I frankly don't know what the reasons are. Reasons are not clear, individual. Then some things were relating to the ethnic conflict that was in the country, right? So that is a little bit more clear in terms of what the reasons may have been, the motivations may have been. Some things were to do clearly directly with financial corruption, where individuals were benefiting at the expense of the citizen. If you take, for example, Sri Lankan Airlines purchases of Air buses, and the Serious Frauds Office in the UK took Airbus to courts in the UK and got convictions. About 5 countries they had paid bribes. Sri Lanka was one of them, and even named the individuals in Sri Lanka who had actually got a bribe or money into, I think if I remember, an account in Singapore or something like that.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So the company which was registered in Brunei, the bank accounts were in Singapore.
Right. So, yeah.
Subsequently, the money was transferred to another bank account in Australia.
Okay.
So all this is widely known.
Right. So what I'm saying is, now if you take that case, for example, I mean, that's something in which the people who have, if the British courts have basically convicted somebody, right?
The Airbus industry actually admitted all of this and admitted it in court. And I believe it was a joint operation with the FBI and the French authorities as well.
Yeah. So if the conviction has already happened in a jurisdiction outside Sri Lanka, right, the losses to the Sri Lankan state, you say, Airbus will recover whatever its issue, not Airbus. I'm talking of the British Serious Office has gone in there because Airbus has got an undue advantage at the expense of other airline manufacturers. No, what I'm saying is the loss eventually is to the purchaser, And here Sri Lanka is a purchaser. It's to the country. It's to our taxpayer, you see. And there's no justice to the taxpayer, even though there's a conviction there. And that is why the Sri Lankan authorities should go after those, you see, to make sure that the taxpayer, the citizen, is safeguarded, the citizen is compensated. So on the financial transactions, some of those other ones also may be related to finance. I just don't know, all the details of that. This government, because they have come on that promise, and this is something I think this government can actually deliver on. You see, they can deliver on. Because lots of people holding office are new to politics. They haven't still been accused. And I use the word still, because the only reason is human beings are human beings. There is no perfect individual, there is no perfect political party either. And always there are bad eggs in everything. But they have this advantage where they are all still new, you see, and that they can pursue justice, and I think that's something that they could actually deliver, you see. I think the challenges for them really come more on the economic front, more than on the rule of law and justice. So I hope the justice issues will get actually closed out soon.
But it's related, isn't it? The justice and corruption issues are one of the biggest reasons why Sri Lanka just can't seem to get much foreign direct investment, because investors who have come here have been given the runaround because of corrupt systems and corrupt people, and then a year or two later they just take their money and leave and go to another country, and then they spread the word saying, don't go to Sri Lanka, this is a mess that Sri Lanka is in. So not only do we lose that investor, but many others who may have come to Sri Lanka if not for the shenanigans of a few officials, be they politicians or civil service or even private sector.
Yeah, so if you take the last few years, right, you had Gotabaya Rajapaksa as president, basically following wrong economic policy. The country becomes basically bankrupt, inflation soars. We in the opposition kept shouting and saying you need fiscal discipline, management, and because they can't do it, then we say, at least get back into the IMF program. The IMF comes, the program is put in place, and there are some benefits of it. Because if you look at it now, right, the exchange rate is a bit more stable, inflation has come down, reserves have gone up, and that is the positive side. There's nothing to do with this government. That's to do with the earlier process. Nothing, no credit to this government on that, right? So, but it's in the right space. The credit I would give this government is that it's continuing the macroeconomic framework. It hasn't gone and just, though it's said in election meetings and all, we'll come, we'll change this, change that, change the other thing. They didn't do that. And it's to their credit, because, you can fool the electorate by saying various things to win an election. But when you actually come to make decisions, you must make the proper decision. And therefore sticking with this is a proper decision. But these are the challenges for these people. Now you are absolutely right when you said that the rule of law, if I can use that word, is related to investor confidence and businesses growing. Absolutely right. Because the first thing that the investor will look at is the country risk. And the country risk before they look at their industry and markets and returns and all that. So this is very critical that they look at the country risk. So on one side, you have a government which has a majority, and that gives a certain level of political stability. And then those macroeconomic fundamentals have really improved. So that framework is there. But to bring investment and to bring them in large numbers, a lot more needs to be done. So I think some of the challenges that the government has, and they will have to really, really address this, right, is, for example, state-owned enterprises. Right, and these state-owned enterprises, many governments over a long period of time have done various things trying to reform them, right? And
it just doesn't work, does it?
No,
it might work for a short period of time.
It can.
But then it's personality driven. You want to appoint a good private sector person as chairman or CEO. It works. Then when the government changes, he steps down. He or she steps down and then goes back to what it needs to be.
You're absolutely right. It's more person driven. So they think if you take X or Y or a CEO from here or there and you put the person in, that'll kind of work. That's good. You should do that. I encourage private sector people with a lot of experience to actually help government. But that's good. But it's a systemic things that you need to look at. So on state-owned enterprises, for example, right, if something can be run better by the private sector, it should be given to the private sector. If it needs foreign investment, be open, take the foreign investment. If you have good reasons, strategic reasons, and these strategic reasons are there, for example, in the energy sector, in terms of water, so there are certain areas in which of food security where the state needs to be involved. There you can have state involvement, you can even have public-private partnerships there, so that you are really carefully thought through. But if you try to do what the private sector can do better, and you're making a mistake, this mistake has been made for the last 75 years, and we should get out of it. So I'm waiting to see what's the government's position on state-owned enterprises. Sometimes people run away by using words, privatization. What's wrong with that word? I just don't understand. You see, it's Sri Lankan citizens. You see, what's wrong with it? If you are calling that privatization, then we'll have to call this government servants companies. Do you follow what I'm saying? No. So you need to be open. So state-owned enterprises is going to be a challenge. Still not clear, because the old Marxist thinking was the state can produce and the state can distribute. That's theory. You see.
But it's a theory which simply didn't work.
Hasn't worked.
Country after country for decades. I mean, it's been about over a century since Russia first became Marxist, in 1917, and it just didn't work. It spread around the world, and it didn't work. Very few cases were there where it sort of worked, but in the overwhelming majority, it just didn't work. So state trying to run businesses and compete with the private sector and with international players just doesn't work, does it?
No. So as a rule, I would say it doesn't work. But as I said, for strategic reasons, the state's partnership is required in certain areas. Then the other one is public sector reform. I'm waiting to see, because you go and talk to any citizen in this country. Everywhere you go, you hear a complaint. The complaint is about, generally is about service levels. And the complaint is, I went to get something done, and basically, they told me to come 2 days later, 3 days later. Oh, I want to get an approval. It's going on for months and months and months, right? Everywhere you go, whatever area you talk about, right? The citizen is not happy. They are actually complaining. So that you have on one side, service levels.
And that situation has fallen to abysmal levels now. Eran. I mean, we have the passport situation, the national ID situation. Now, we have a government apparatus which is incapable of issuing national identity cards to people. They actually give you a certificate saying you've applied and this is your number and it has your picture. So that's what children, when they're about to sit the O-levels, that's when they get their national ID cards. They're given this piece of paper instead.
So from your birth certificate to your death certificate and everything in between, including a marriage certificate, right? And your driving license to your passport to you name it, whatever, right? And then your approvals, right? Getting your garbage collected at the local council, getting your approval to build a room or a house or whatever, to getting your utilities, to whatever, everywhere you go. Talk to citizens. I am challenging anybody to do a survey, right? It's a really, really low rating that the public sector gets. And then what have we been doing for 75 years? Political parties, right? And particularly the political parties in power today, right? They have been talking about the rights of workers, rights of workers. I'm all for the rights of workers. I completely deplore what the former government did in really, playing out the employees of this country in the debt restructuring when they only focused on the EPF. That's really robbing employees' money. So I'm all for the defending the rights of workers, right? However, we have only talked about worker rights, these political parties. Rarely talked about consumer rights. Rarely talked about consumer rights. Rarely talked about, right, the rights of the citizen. We need a shift in the thinking. The shift in the thinking is consumer is first. Citizens are first, right? Workers, we are there only in the interim. And that's how this should be looked at. So I want to see a party who's only talked about that for such a long time. How are they going to rebalance it? Because the public service, right, and politicians don't like to say this because they feel that their voter base will be affected, right, has to be trimmed. Sri Lanka has one of the largest public services in the world as a percentage of the total population. It has to be trimmed. Public servants, the best brains go in there, have to be better paid. So smaller numbers, well remunerated. And then the other thing that we don't do, we should be doing, is learning is lifelong. We should be heavily investing in training in the public service, heavily investing in the training of the public service, and ongoing. Private sector does that to some extent, but the public sector is very, very poor in that, and we should do it. So what I'm talking about is really elevating the status of the public sector, not politicians coming at election time and saying, I'll add 100,000 jobs, right, and for political reasons, and ruining the public sector of this country. So this government has a challenge. State-owned enterprises, public sector, right, they also have a challenge in education, right. Our USP is geography, right, how we are placed as a country, open to the Indian subcontinent. But the other one is human resources. Every child in this country must be given an education and a higher education, right. Government alone can't do it. So the story that again was sold for 50 years, free education, right? This story that was sold. I mean, if it can be done, please do it. Even the
but it's failed because children are, going for tuition classes for everything.
Yeah, the system has failed. But if you look at the allocations that that were given last week in Parliament, right, table for the budget, no significant increase in the numbers, right? So it can't be done by the state, not Sri Lanka. Anywhere in the world it can't be done. So this is the conceptual shift we need. It is not about free education only. I'm all for free education. I'm a product of free education. My parents couldn't have afforded to put me through a private education. I'm a product of free education. But it's access to education that we should be looking at. Conceptual shift. Every child must be given access. So whatever you can give as grants, please give it. But don't stop giving the education just because you can't give the grant. Then give the rest even by giving a loan. And the child can get the education when he starts working. Maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, he can start repaying it. This is nothing new. Other countries are doing it. But the problem that these people are facing is sometimes they have got fixed with an old concept and got trapped into the old concept. So the supply of education doesn't only have to be government. It can be the private sector. It can be non-government, non-profit distributing sector. The top institutions in the world, universities to vocational training, are non-government, non-profit distributing. It can be that sector as well. So I am waiting to see what they are going to do. State-owned enterprises, public sector reform, education, whether they can break out of the old box. And I am hoping against hope that with the majority that they have got, that they will be able to take some bold steps on these reforms. These are the challenges in the next phase for the new government.
Well, Eran, I'm afraid we are out of time. It's been lovely having you on the show once again. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a good evening.